Welcome to our continuing series of virtual voices hosted by World Information Transfer and focusing on the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Our speaker today is Mr. Kevin Baird, who is a global leader in accelerated literacy and workforce development, focusing on equitable teaching practices, international accreditation for the workforce ability, and utilizing expanded language models for human development. He chairs the Center for College and Career Readiness and works worldwide to enhance student literacy and workforce preparedness. He has designed trauma readiness courses, authored books on fostering trust, and contributed to national educational pathways. His research includes student engagement through early literacy via digital platforms and mother tongue texts and pioneering low bandwidth AL content for global leaders. He holds degrees in sociology, anthropology, and business, and is an accredited learning environment planner, a Beinecke Scholar, a Wingspread Fellow, and active in global educational development. Over to you, Mr. Baird.
Dr. Jovic, thank you so much. And it's great to see so many young faces here on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation and we'll get going. I hope you all imagine today as the beginning of a conversation. I'm going to be somewhat broad in my commentary as we think about how we use technology to help development in vulnerable economies. But over time, we can actually drill down into the model I'm going to present to you. I'd like to note my thanks not only to the World Information Transfer, but to the All True Institute, which helps us to understand the complexity, amongst other things, of the United Nations, and Movement, which is a global network in transformation. So that's me. And I'm going to talk about 5 things. I know probably the word technology interested many of you, but we need to first talk about our strategy and then think about what we're trying to do with that technology toward the strategy. And then finally, we get to our tools. We'll ask ourselves, what do we want those tools to do? And what are the priority actions? I'll give you my email. It's actually on the screen as well. This is all part of a very significant economic development model relative to the use of technology. And you are all welcome to that in the entirety of that model. I'm going to show you pieces of it today. And by the way, if there's anything that I say today that sounds even remotely interesting, it's simply because in my life, I've made a lot of mistakes, right? The world is our best teacher. So whether it was developing models across the People's Republic of China or looking at building workforce development in Colombia, all of these pieces really have come together because of the errors in learning from them. I did not map my commentary today to the SDGs, but I hope you will see how each of the elements aligns to our sustainable development goals. Let's begin then with starting where we have to start, and that is strategy. And I want you to think not about technology, but about the teams of people who have to interact together to do a thing, to help economies move forward. And we need greater teams. We need smarter teams to help our economies that are vulnerable. So I would suggest to you that we need to consider economic policy, agriculture and food security, industry and manufacturing, trade and investment, infrastructure and education, just to begin. Each of these strategic verticals will have a different set of technologies we might consider because they have a different set of outcomes. As you consider technology, I want you to think about both asynchronous and synchronous right now, and the idea that many of the folks that need to be a part of those teams will reside all around the world. And so remote communication, team sharing, project sharing becomes absolutely critical. Lastly, we can't forget our strategies around healthcare and public health, energy and resources, Financial services and inclusion. By the way, inclusion here means making sure that everyone inside of an economy has literally the opportunity to get paid and to win from that economic development. Environmental sustainability, social development, and inclusion. And again, I hope you see how each of these aligns to an SDG. And lastly, governance and institutional development. Many of us become excited about new technologies, but I would note that every good outcome begins with planning, with understanding about how the development of that technology has happened and how it interacts, and then the implementation and operation. I'm going to give you a very simple example. I want you to imagine that you have these work teams together, and they are considering how to move forward, for instance, the economy of the Philippines. And some of these folks have decided that they're going to use technologies that are built out on AWS. That's a particular kind of sharing and networking, okay? Amazon. And then other folks on your teams have decided that they want to adopt technologies that are based upon Microsoft's Azure. And we have a former executive from Microsoft who's a friend here, so she'll no doubt speak about that in a later chat with you all. But that ends up becoming a real significant challenge. Choosing platforms for technologies and interaction and interoperability are absolutely critical. So consider my image here about how you evaluate your technology and choose to be absolutely critical as a first step to deciding what you're going to do. And I note that the innovation and technology team, I could have given it a number, but it really needs to interoperate across all of our strategic teams. If I zoom out then, if I consider acceleration technology, I need to think first about my strategic goals. I need to consider who are my subject matter experts. Are they multinational? Are they cross-disciplinary? And those elements drive me to a process for evaluation of the technologies that I'm going to deploy or that I'm going to evaluate. Once I have my strategic teams in place, I need to ask myself, what are the goals and what are the indicators of those goals? And I would suggest to you that those have to go together. Whenever my teams are thinking about what they're trying to do, I ask them how they're measuring that. And that question actually gets them to a better, more specific goal. Before we think about the strategic teams, however, and their specific areas, I would ask you to consider the foundation. We use this word today, acceleration. Acceleration means faster growth, but growth from where? We have to begin with an understanding of the foundation of the economy, the foundation of the region or the geography or the country that we're starting from. Consider the following elements. I have to begin by understanding my demographics. If I'm thinking about, for instance, a relatively young population, for instance, in the Philippines or in sub-Saharan Africa, as compared to an older demographic, that's going to have a difference in my approach. What's my energy output? For instance, do I have the availability of solar energy? Right now, there's actually an advantage to areas of the world that are more arid, that don't have a lot of things above ground, so I can put my solar panels out. Or maybe I need to think about energy that comes from wave action or hydrology. What's my energy foundation? What's my currency foundation? If I am in a very volatile currency area, or I'm in an inflationary part of the world, that's going to really impact my access to capital and investment. What's my high-speed internet infrastructure? And I'm going to dive into that a little bit. But if you're thinking about technology, please, you must evaluate your access to bandwidth. What are my land resources and my geographical resources, my natural resources? Lastly, over to the left, there's a smaller pie chart, which really is speaking about what's the education level? What are my human skills and my human resources? And lastly, what's my security situation? Because frankly, all of the best technology in the world is not necessarily going to help if I'm in the middle of a civil war, or I may have to deploy different kinds of technologies to accelerate that economy. Begin with the foundation, and that actually defines acceleration for what you're trying to do. As we consider this notion of access to bandwidth or the pipe, I want you to consider, I have two different examples here. I have actually an example from Colombia. I live half-time in Colombia, Medellin. What's my access to bandwidth for mobility? That's actually for all of the folks that are going to be out in the world. They might be working in the field, they might be at home. That's about finance, that's about healthcare. And then my fixed broadband. But it isn't just the width of the pipe, how big the pipe is. It is also how constant the connectivity is. I can tell you in Medellin and many parts of Colombia, the bandwidth seems pretty good, but it's constantly down. It is intermittent in terms of connections. In some of the cities in Africa, in Ghana, for instance, we have challenges where I can't actually put information in really large packets because the internet connectivity, it comes and goes and comes and goes. So if you experience video here in the US and you're on any of the good video platforms, maybe Peacock or Netflix or whatnot, you'll notice that they all have differences in how reliable they are depending upon mobile speed and even sometimes my fixed speed. And it's because of their approach to the pipe and to connectivity. As well as we're thinking about economies that are developing or vulnerable economies, we have to consider the mobile ecosystem. What you see on the right-hand side here, this is sub-Saharan Africa. Today, 99% of sub-Saharan Africa has access to a SIM connection, or a family does. But by 2030, 88% of all those connections will be 3G or 5G. And that says a lot about the kinds of technologies I can plan for. It also talks about my migration strategy from today to tomorrow. So please consider those elements. A very specific example, if we look at satellite versus fixed broadband, or right now, well, actually, this is Q1 of last year. So the Philippines is doing really well. If we look at their Starlink capacity, especially in terms of their download MBIPs, compare that to Peru is kind of up and coming, and then with Starlink, and then you have Nigeria. Nigeria has greater challenges. Compare those numbers to the Superloop. The Superloop is one of the fastest high-capacity fiber optic networks in the world. It goes from Los Angeles in the US over to Las Vegas, up to Reno, San Francisco, back down to LA. So at home, they're looking at 100-40 Mbps. Okay, so that's 100. So actually, my Starlink in the Philippines seems pretty good there, right? That would be at home. Super fast is about 250. Light speed, and by the way, the Superloop, on top of it, we have some of the biggest companies in the world. They need the light speed at 500. So if I'm looking at the Philippines and I'm thinking about technologies, I'm doing fairly well in terms of my bandwidth, certainly for home, maybe approaching super fast. But this thing is a gating element for the technologies that I choose and how fast I can accelerate my foundation. And please be careful about what we assume that technology is going to be used for. I'm wondering if anyone might guess what's happening in this picture. Think about mobile technology. You can see I have a steering wheel here. Well, this technology is a tractor. And today, if you look at our advanced technology for agriculture, I'm using direct satellite uplink mobile technologies to understand the moisture in the soil, actually to determine the amount of fertilizer or the chemicals I need to put here. That is a computer in and of itself. But again, it's limited by its bandwidth. Okay, enough about that. I just want to make sure that we're all considering that as we go down a road of selecting technology. So what are we trying to do? Inside of the model, again, I've just chosen a few elements. In agriculture and food security, I might be piloting projects for sustainable farming practices as an early stage. I might do something different mid-range, different long-range. In industry, I might be trying to identify and support key manufacturing sectors. Education, I might be looking at implementing vocational training in key sectors. And by the way, those two go together, right? For financial services, I might want to make sure that I'm expanding financial services to underserved populations. And by the way, that can be really great because many of those folks may well be my workforce of the future. How do I think about technology there? And then lastly, for innovation and technology for the future, how do I establish innovation hubs? These are all simply examples of outcomes and indicators that I might drive to in a first phase of my economic development in these types of economies. So I want you to consider a few examples. And by the way, I would note the UN is a really large organization. Again, Altru Institute can help you kind of navigate some of that. If you don't know these parts or these publications, you should look into them. Here we have an article on using satellite technology to transform agriculture in developing countries. Actually, the survey of the land, understanding what's there, the best places to plant, what are some of the climatology considerations, et cetera. That is a critical first goal in thinking about how I accelerate from the economy of today, the agriculture of today, into something more advanced. Up here, you see a great technical webinar, by the way, on thinking about water management for climate smart agriculture. By the way, water management isn't just about kind of how I get water, reuse water, evaluate if the water is going to cause a problem in my agriculture, but also I need to think about how I am reclaiming and ensuring that my rivers or my water sources are clean. By the way, the technology that you see down at the bottom, you might not think about that as technology, but it is. And it's very simple. And it's something that we can implement without a lot of power, right? Or without a lot of infrastructure. All of these are examples of technology that will accelerate agriculture and food security strategies, especially in my fragile economies. Industry and manufacturing. Today, many of our AI tools, many of our new advanced tools are being used to forecast economic growth. It isn't necessarily easy in a developing economy to understand where I should invest, where I am likely to find both a matching of skills, the implementation of a university or an educational program, and economic development. Predictive tools right now are becoming incredibly important for our economists in thinking about those emerging markets and those industries. By the way, I can also think about power and what kind of power sources I'm going to need or access to power. That's a key manufacturing support. And what you see here is you actually are seeing the implementation of energy storage that's using flare gas to transform the flare gas into electricity and then storing it there. I'm going to tell you why that's important. I'm going to make a very specific case in a moment. Or up in the upper right-hand corner, that's actually a picture from Colombia. In Colombia right now, Colombia is the center of textiles in the Americas. They have a burgeoning textile industry, fashion industry, clothing manufacturing industry. The problem is that the forecast for the ability to manufacture the raw materials shows that we're going to have a gap. We're not going to be able to manufacture enough textiles, and so we need to invest there. So think about technology as being able to be smarter, right? I have this really interesting case study, by the way, for Congo. I don't know if anyone is here from the DRC, but so in Congo, they have enormous need for generation, and they're actually quite a large manufacturer of diesel generators. And what that means is that they are ripe. This is a ripe market to think about the advancement, not of the diesel generator manufacturing, but also, for instance, of the power storage and manufacturing of power through flare gas because of their other extractive industries. So technology simply helping me to be smarter. A few other case studies here. Education, skills, workforce development. This is actually from Colombia, the first set of pictures. You'll notice a little video icon with sewing. So in Medellin, Colombia, we are training Venezuelan refugees to develop skills in the manufacture of clothing. That's what you see there. We're using subject matter experts. The fella there in the black t-shirt is actually the fashion designer for several celebrities in LA, and he's the primary designer. And the things that they're making actually will be at New York Fashion Week. All of their education and training begins actually online on the mobile device. YouTube today is one of our best universities. And then they go and they work with a professora in the actual workshop. I have a few other examples here of how technology helps us to think about how we train. You see the mobile phone service training program there. So here, I'm actually marrying in-class work, okay, in-class training with training that can happen at home, or training that can happen in my native language, in my mother tongue. And lastly, thinking about that opportunity to create a greater economy with generators in Congo, you see Generator Guru. And I can actually learn to maintain generators. I can actually learn to maintain almost any kind of mechanism through YouTube and video content. So these types of technologies and content using the mobile device to train my workforce become really critical. Financial services as another example. One of the things that happened during the pandemic is that in places where they could, we saw a real explosion of online and mobile first banking applications. That includes the Philippines. I want you to consider, as you're thinking about strategic work groups for economic development, what are the mobile applications for financial services? And by the way, that's not just the ability, for instance, to get paid or to pay a bill, but it might be to get a loan from my workplace, or to get a credit card or other kinds of financial services. Remember, if we don't include the majority of our populace in our financial services, I literally can foment political unrest because not everyone is winning. And I need to make sure that everyone is connected so that they can win. I just give an example here of Vibe Cash. That is seamless mobile banking in Nigeria, very popular. And lastly, one of the really interesting technologies, if you can think about it that way, is crypto. So cryptocurrencies are being dramatically adopted across Africa because I can use them anywhere. It's easier to exchange. I don't have other kinds of problems of physical money. All of these are examples of the types of technologies and technology outcomes that I want to consider in those strategic verticals. Lastly, I suggested to you that we have to think in terms of technology about how do we create innovation hubs so that we can think about those things. Where is my innovation hub for agriculture and new agricultural machinery? The Global Innovation Index is a little bit scary, and actually it is a predictor of where I'm going to have really significant challenges in moving economies forward. On the right, what you see on that map is actually the number of incubators, the number of entrepreneurial or technology incubators. Consider that in New York, in the United States, I have 567 incubators in the city alone. Across the entire continent of Africa, I have fewer than 100. This becomes a critical task for all of us if we want to see innovation and we want to see adoption of technology. I use this as a simple example. I knew that we were going to have students here. So great, Kevin. I need incubators. I need them in Africa. What should I do? Well, let's start by asking our personal assistant for thinking over at OpenAI, ChatGPT, where I asked them, I don't know, where might I cite a technology incubator in Tanzania? And they gave me three places. Arusha sounded interesting. And so I asked in Arusha, who are three partners that I might reach out to? And my point is this, that technology as an assistant to you, if you are a student, if you are doing this work at the UN or a planner, helps us to think faster and accelerate our own connectivity. I could find out the number, the phone number, or the email over at Nelson Mandela's African Institute of Science and Tech and make that connection. And by the way, number 5, UNDP actually has a program in Tanzania. So I know I've taken some time to kind of set it up to say, technology is great and it's bright and shiny, but if I haven't thought through my strategies in each of the verticals, I haven't thought through my platforms, and I haven't thought through what I'm really trying to accomplish, I really can't select the tools. But let's get to some of the fun things. What are some of the tools that I might select? Again, I want to note, this is all part of a model that specifies these elements, and you can email me and I'll give you the entire model because it's actually different in each one of those strategic areas? And am I thinking about early, mid-range, or long-range? Mid-range in economic policy and planning, I might think about blockchain technologies for transparent government spending, all right? In industry and manufacturing, it might be 3D printing for prototyping. And by the way, you see down at the bottom a call for writers looking at how we can use 3D printing technologies right now in strengthening the capacity of Africa's manufacturing sector. And I would suggest to all of you, 3D printing is an amazing way to build very small incubators very cheaply to develop new kinds of technology implementations that actually fit the economic sector where I'm trying to build. Nothing happens without money. How do you go find the money? Well, there are technology platforms for that. As a matter of fact, Global Business Interaction is a platform to connect investors globally with opportunities for incubation and for entrepreneurs around the world. And many of those are angel investors. So that's really early, right? Think about how I connect to money. Lastly, I want you to consider the various technologies for telemedicine. And telemedicine isn't just something, again, on my phone or on my computer. What you see here is a telemedicine clinic in Haiti. And actually, telemedicine in Haiti right now, because of the security environment, back to foundations, has really changed because it's really hard to get to the telemedicine outlets. And so now partners in health and others are moving to deploy telemedicine actually on their mobile devices. When they didn't have to do that before, they could actually get folks to the clinic. Everything depends about what stage and what's my goal. I already spoke to mobile banking and cryptocurrency, but I would note one of the really important technologies right now is actually evaluating, number one, what's a good site for different kinds of energy generation. So what you see down there, that's actually a little mobile device that I can put all over the countryside to evaluate, can I actually put solar power there? And what kind of solar power would be generated? And by the way, that same platform can have different instrumentation on it to then go out and monitor, for instance, my cleanliness in my air. What are kind of pollutants are going into my environment as I'm actually building out my economy. Another really interesting technology that's becoming very important, especially in my vulnerable economies, is digital IDs. Here you see an article, Tanzania has kind of been moving away from or not adopting digital IDs, perhaps as fast as others in East Africa. Inside of the model, each specific strategy has a particular set of technologies depending upon the goal. I am simply highlighting some of the technologies that you have not thought of. I'm going to suggest that you do think about, and you think about the model holistically. Many of you know that education is critical and foundational, but it is a challenge because of language. So I want to introduce to you a revolutionary technology that actually has implications across all of the strategies, because I can take pretty much anything that I have created, for instance, in English or in French or in Spanish, and I can deploy it around the world in many, many other languages. It goes like
My name's Nick Black, and I was born in Memphis, Tennessee. I have been through so many different styles of music in my life.
Pero may makabuluhan at hindi malilimutan noong 18 taon.
Đi nói như Vésit. Et puis moi, notamment, Dions en miem.
Được vài nhạc rock and roll. Tôi đã nghe tất cả những loại đó. Tôi muốn nghe một loại nào đó mới mẻ.
ما هي الكلمة؟ قالت تجدها في هذا النادي الصغير في الطابق السفلي في الشارع الرئيسي في منفيس.
not only the delivery of the content, whether it's in video or in print, but also the captioning. This technology has incredible opportunity for us. One, it's much easier to learn English or to learn other languages. The single most utilized university for the learning of English around the world we call Netflix or Amazon Prime. It's literally watching movies and other kinds of media. But all of those workforce development videos that I showed you, they can now be translated into all of these other languages. So for instance, basic health. Maybe I have a video that talks about how to nurse my baby, or that talks about basic health and prevention. Those videos may be available right now in the US or developed economies in English or in a few languages, and I can now get them out into the developing world. Absolutely incredible transformation. And by the way, we know how to teach language, basic languages remotely. That happens all the time. This is actually a technology that I developed where I can train a person to become fluent in English through a very short period of time using a variety of lessons. School now can happen everywhere, as can workforce development in any language. A few other pieces of technology implementation I want you to consider that are absolutely transformative for those vulnerable economies. The credential. If I have obtained a skill, one of the things that's true in vulnerable economies is I have a lot more migration. I want to be able to credential in that skill so that if I do migrate, if I do go to another locality, I have a credential that goes with me so I can get a similar job. The ability to access different kinds of university courses online. That's in the upper right hand. And lastly, the ability to engage all of my young people in different kinds of animations for early literacy. Here in the US, we have something called Sesame Street. Sesame Street was critical in the development of the American economy, especially in the 60s, 1970s, and the early 1980s. Today, we can actually create almost automatically using AI tools, different kinds of early literacy programming and cartoons and different kinds of videos that teach those same kinds of skills. These are all foundational technologies that are available today, and they were not available even 18 months ago. To wrap up, once you consider your strategy, once you think about what's the outcome you're driving to and the indicators, and you're then selecting your technologies, you need to ask what kinds of questions are the technologies going to answer? I was recently with Altru Institute in January in Davos, Switzerland, during the World Economic Forum. And the single most important question that they were asking there was, what do we need to do with technology? Not what does the technology do, but what do we need to do with it? Because so much is possible. The use cases today are stunning. Don't ask as you are looking at the technology platform simply what it can do. Ask how it can accelerate the insight. Just as I showed you with ChatGPT, where should I put that incubator in Tanzania? And who should I connect with? And one of the most important insights today, I believe, is sentiment analysis. How do your users, how does your populace, your government, how do investors view your project or the infrastructure or the security situation? This really hits home for me because, again, I live half time in Medellin, Colombia. When I come back to the States and I'm talking to people who are very well educated, often who have a lot of money, what they think about when they hear Medellin, Colombia, is they think about narcos. They think about the Medellin of 20 years ago. And they ask me questions about how safe is it? Will you be kidnapped? Well, no, actually not. But I can use tools to actually gauge the sentiment in other parts of the world. So I understand where can I go to actually obtain investment? Where can I go to obtain partners? And by the way, what kinds of projects are going to resonate worth my new workforce? And lastly, I can't do everything at once. So how do I prioritize in each of my strategic areas? So as you look at the model over time, and again, I can offer you all of these pieces, I want you to note that there are some elements that are foundational. If you don't have your economic policy into place, if I don't have a handle on my currency, I'm going to have a really hard time attracting investment and attracting other companies. As an investor myself, I can tell you it's absolutely true. If I don't have a view to how I'm going to educate the workforce of the future, what good is the economic development? I don't have anyone to use the technology. Right? These are foundational elements. I have other kinds of critical things like social development and inclusion. I can't talk enough about this. If you look at unrest around the world, very oftentimes I've done a really great job educating a population, but I don't have economic opportunities for them. What happens to the young man who is widely educated and wants a job and doesn't have any job? That young man or that young woman is really quite angry about it. So I need to consider in my priorities what's foundational, what's critical but can work independently, infrastructure can work independently. And then lastly, what are my dependent variables? For instance, innovation and technology may very well be dependent upon energy. If I don't have enough juice to power the technology, it doesn't make any sense to invest there. So you have to line up all of those elements in a row. And I can provide some insight into that. Technology integration is different in each phase. For instance, right now, if you think about AI and predictive analytics, a lot of folks are using those predictive models to analyze economic trends inside of those vulnerable economies. The Philippines, again, a really great example as we look at the build out of the Philippines as a center of kind of personal assistance for the English-speaking world, because they have a lot of English speakers there. And even for those who aren't fluent in English, it's not a wide journey, a long journey to become more fluent in English. And as I showed you before, they have really good connectivity. So even on my out islands, I can increase my connectivity. So using AI to predict those trends, to assess my infrastructure needs, what do I need to do first? Or to predict my healthcare demands. And lastly, to forecast my agricultural outputs. So right now, that's a really great use of the early phase as I think about my vulnerable economies. Then later, I can think about how I use that for policy analysis, right? Or personalized learning or governance. So technology integration is going to be different inside of each phase, from early to mid-range, financial services, energy trade, and then lastly, my later stage, innovation and technology. I want to open this up to questions, but I would just note, as you consider the job.
Okay. Thank you very, very much for a very informative and encouraging Superloop speed technology, which will accelerate growth, production in developing countries through transformative teaching webinars in any language. And now we will move over to our moderator, Susie Halleck. Over to you, Susie.
Thank you very much. And thanks so much for the amazing presentation. So the first question from the audience is, how do you replicate the in-person learning experience through digital platforms? Have you found them to be just as effective in upskilling workforces, or do you prefer blending in-person and virtual experiences?
Great question. It really depends on the kind of learning. So for instance, for language learning, I can have a lot of success on a mobile platform because I can hear the language, I can interact, I can actually speak now with some of those technologies, and I'm going to practice inside of my regular ecosystem. For other kinds of specific goals, for instance, perhaps I need to learn how to maintain that generator. I need to have some kind of practice in an actual kind of physical setting. Don't discount the ability for interactivity in a shared environment like this, where I'm using Zoom or other collaborative tools, as long as I have a very clear set of outcomes and I understand, do I need to model a very specific physical skill, or is it simply a cognitive skill or a language skill? So it really depends on what I'm trying to do. A lot of success, though, a lot of success on virtual platforms.
Well, thank you. Learning and training is a key area of focus these days as organizations try to upskill very large remote teams. But many struggle with it. Like I'm sure you've run into situations where there are large teams who really haven't been trained properly given like the remote dynamic. For such organizations, what is like some simple advice to kind of get started in upskilling their workforce in today's environment?
So let's break that down for just a minute, because there are different kinds of upskilling. So number one, the most important skills for any person in any job or any task are actually my soft skills, my power skills, my critical thinking skills. The single most important, there's a lot of research around this, the single most important skill there is called psychological safety. And how do I create safety in that environment? So sometimes in workforce development, it actually isn't safe. Those, you know, those training modules that you go through, you know, you get a frowny face, you get dinged somehow. There is a negative consequence if you didn't do it quickly or you didn't do it well. You have to create psychological safety, number one. Number two, make sure that the person has a mentor or someone that they can talk to around the things that they don't know, and that there are opportunities for conversation and connection. After I have safety, then I have to have interaction and I have to have collaborative learning. Lastly, you need to make sure that whatever you want that person to be skilled in, that they have an opportunity to practice it. I'm sure that we all have examples of things that we learned and then we never practiced and we forgot it. And that can come into play, specifically if I'm trying to train someone to do a thing, and then I don't provide opportunities to them to actually do that thing inside of their work and develop fluencies and in routines.
Thank you. Next question is related to the amazing initiative where you're training Venezuelan refugees in Medellin. I was actually in Medellin over the holidays and was so amazed by the gentrification of the city, the sense of community, how much the city has improved given its history that you alluded to. What do you think has contributed to the city's growth? Maybe you can cite some examples from your own experience training people there.
Sure. So first of all, Medellin, Colombia is a city of many cities. So in El Centro, you have enormous poverty, enormous homeless challenges. In the south and other more developed areas where you have public transportation. Medellin is one of the places where you actually have great public transportation, and that allows folks who are living out in the mountains to come down and to get a job. And we have many of those folks inside of our training initiative. So public transportation is really important. I would also say in Medellin, you have this really interesting rebuilding initiative. So it was the location of a civil war, pretty much, right? And so if you go to Poblado or you go to some of the other areas that are more well-to-do or advanced, that development is more recent. And by the way, that's an opportunity right now for many places that are thinking about leapfrogging in terms of technology. They can move faster because they are rebuilding or they are building anew in terms of the older parts of the older parts of the city. Lastly, I would note that if you look at Medellin, the economy there grows on good bones. It grows on a foundation, for instance, in the textile industry, which is huge there. Textiles have been there for a really long time. So it wasn't growing from nothing. It was building upon skills and infrastructure that were already there. And I think that's really important. A lot of really well-meaning people decide they're going to go make a thing somewhere, but it's new, and they haven't really thought about what is the infrastructure there. We can go find professores who can teach the Venezuelan refugees those skills because those skills were already existing there in the foundation.
Could you discuss some of the challenges you've encountered in implementing AI in some of your initiatives?
Sure. I'll go back to AI before it was called AI. For a couple of years, I built with the Chinese government predictive technologies. I have patents in predictive technologies and weather and traffic. And we built out across China. One of the things we just didn't ask all of the right questions. And so we weren't actually thinking as we were considering mobile devices and how I get weather information and traffic information, especially during emergency events. We weren't asking ourselves about hardened infrastructure. So I want you to consider if you're trying to do something on mobile platforms and your mobile coverage doesn't overlap very much. And one of those towers is in a place that is prone, for instance, to a typhoon. You made a big mistake, especially if you're trying to prevent people from being harmed in the typhoon. If I look inside of my career, I could sum up the challenges in using predictive technologies as not asking the right question of the technology, not predicting the right thing. And that's why I spend so much time today talking to you all about foundations, about really foundational thinking and asking, what could go wrong? I'll give you one other example, and this goes to education and training. There are a wide variety of cultural differences that we don't necessarily know, or we can't predict. The technology can't predict. As a matter of fact, yesterday, I was with a very large educational enterprise. And one of the statements to me was that they would like to have, quote, their own LLM, their own AI that tuned all of the information that came out of the AI to their cultural sensitivities, because they're very concerned about getting information that is culturally offensive to their audience. If I'm developing solutions, I might not necessarily, or my AI might not necessarily predict what some of those cultural issues are. Insight is the critical human skill today. You have to have insight. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. What drives your passion for promoting equitable access to education and opportunities across diverse communities? In other words, what fuels you to establish equitable learning environments?
I live in the United States. I was born in 1969. I grew up without running water. I actually grew up without plumbing. The only reason I am not poor today is because of education and because of people in the education system who saw something in me. I was able to go to college, to university, to law school, to graduate school, that MBA. All of that was paid for. I was really lucky. And if we consider what the world's going to look like for all of us, and I really mean all of us. Look at what's happening in Ukraine today, or look at what could happen in other developing economies where I could have unrest. What happens in the Philippines with unrest or with terrorism, that has a direct impact on me here in the US. The solution to that is making sure that all of us have an opportunity to develop our God-given gifts. But by the way, that development of those gifts, it just doesn't matter at all if I don't have an opportunity locally to go use those gifts. And that's why it has to go together. You cannot talk about education without talking about economic development. It just doesn't work. And by the way, you're going to have to think about health, and you're going to have to think about finance, because I have to be healthy and I have to win. If I can't get paid or I can't use my money for things, then my education didn't matter. But literally, I do what I do because I shouldn't be able to. I'm lucky I got to.
Really inspiring. Thank you for sharing that. And how do you, because it's an interesting dichotomy these days with the access to information that you're bringing with like increased broadband access, but then you still have these institutions that are extremely, extremely expensive to get an education from, but then you have like free virtual class.
This is where I believe the United Nations has an absolutely critical role to play. The UN is a place where we come together, where we connect, where we collaborate. It is a place of communication and conversation. The really expensive places on planet Earth to get an education, the Harvard, the Yales, all of those places. Yes, it's true. They have really intelligent folks who are professors, and they can have access to really interesting technologies or research. But what they most have is they have access to other students who are really interesting and smart. And you know what they aren't? They aren't diverse, and they aren't from all over the world. The United Nations as a place to convene all of us together, to learn together. I have access, you have access today to the same research as the best researchers in Stanford. And one of the reasons I know that is because if you look at the number of patents that are being applied for today by teenagers around the world using that same research, okay? It isn't access to the content, it's access to each other. So I'm sure we have some folks who are working at different universities here, and I don't mean to in any way impugn those universities. But for all of us, the equity of humanity is in our networks and in our coming together. And if we can do that more, then we will win. And this was free. Today was free. I'll give you the economic models for free. We'll do this again. We could do it for every single strategy for free. Good thinking doesn't have to cost a lot of money.
How do you navigate the challenges of working across countries, like aligning to global standards, requirements, the differences? What have you found most effective to help you collaborate globally?
I want you to remember that the number one strategy we have to think about is policy and governance, right? So kind of what's that ecosystem? I'm going to give you an example that is top of mind today. Data residency or data sovereignty. It is very difficult today to collaborate across platforms, say in the EU or in the Middle East or in parts of Asia, if all of my data has to be resident or sovereign inside of that country. That actually means there are a lot of really innovative elements that are shut out. So one of the challenges is actually just understanding that ecosystem and being connected with folks who do understand that ecosystem and where those barriers are. Secondly, you know, I'm sometimes asked by younger folks, high school folks, like, why did you get a sociology or an anthropology degree? Or people ask me, what do you do? And I say, well, I work in predictive technologies. Like, oh, are you an engineer? And I'm like, actually, I know I'm a sociologist and an anthropologist. They all of a sudden they look at me like I'm speaking gibberish. Understanding different cultures and being open to those conversations is an absolutely critical skill. And given who I'm talking to, you guys probably already know that, you all, but it's not always easy navigating those challenges. And so I would say humility and the ability to apologize profusely. Because you're just going to make mistakes. And I know that seems like maybe a silly answer to that question, but that's really true. Understanding the ecosystem of policy, so I know where the technology can play, and then understanding the people who I'm working with becomes absolutely critical in those pieces. A last thing is that very oftentimes the foundational elements get in the way. I'll give you an example. So I was part of an educational project in Ghana. And we totally misread. We thought we had all the information. I had been there. We did a lot of investigation. We totally misread the energy ecosystem and the ability to power multiple devices all at once. And so we had to go back, and we probably lost about a year in that implementation because we simply had to rethink energy. And by the way, that's not just there. In the United States, I was working in Detroit, which is one of our older cities, and they had to turn off all the computers in the school to run the microwaves at lunch. That's a true story. So if you don't have the foundation in play, you run into those kinds of challenges.
Thank you. We have a few more questions in the chat. So the first one is, do you think that AI technology would be a good use for solving and leveling the 17 Sustainable Development Goals?
AI technology is important for helping you gain better insights and thinking deeper and faster. AI technology isn't necessarily going to solve those things by itself. We can have a better understanding, for instance, of where some of our larger problems are. We can get ahead of some of those problems and accelerate our thinking. Some of the technologies, actually, if you think about robotics, or if you think about different kinds of solutions to water quality, all of those pieces, I can actually test faster using AI. But please understand that the technology itself, it just can't replace you. You should be asking, how does the technology help you think better and faster and deeper and accelerate your own thinking? And that's, if you had to put a kind of a point in the entire presentation today, right, which was talking about how we use technology to accelerate growth, it's technology to accelerate you, to accelerate your insights, to get ahead, and to connect us all, by the way, because, I should have said this in the beginning. The SDGs, if I am a developing economy, literally, if I'm being asked not to cut down the rainforest for agriculture, you better have a solution for me. Because you know what? My people, they're going to move forward. They want a better standard of living. They will move forward. And so it's up to all of us and our connection, not only to align to outcomes, but to help lift each other up in that local opportunity to achieve those outcomes. Otherwise, the Sustainable Development Goals, we won't reach them because we won't actually allow people to get ahead. Everybody has to win, folks. Everybody has to win.
Some of the initiatives you spoke about can be implemented through global non-for-profits like the UN, nonprofits supported by generous private funding, profit-driven, and then lastly, profit-driven companies. Can you share how for-profit can do good, but also make money?
So first of all, anything you're doing, you might want to write a note. In my view, it has to be replicable. Got to do it in lots of places. It has to be scalable. We should be able to do it at scale, and it has to be sustainable. The definition of sustainability in this instance is profitable. It has to have excess value so you can keep going. You will never be able to solve the world's problems on the back of charity alone. Profitability simply means that I have excess value for investment in doing it more, making it more scalable, making it more sustainable, making it more effective. None of us should believe that profit is the problem. What is the problem is where the profit goes. If the profit is simply going to go to, a few people, and it's not going to go back to more solutions, that's a challenge, right? But if I am plowing the profit back into my people and into the next set of solutions and into sustainability, that is a flywheel. And actually, the Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, has something called the Philanthropreneur and the Philanthropreneur Institute. And it is that idea that I have an altruistic goal, but I'm not afraid of creating excess value for investment in.
You. I was just jotting that down. Do you have any observed educational systems of certain countries that you feel have really implemented modern practices or principles that you think are worth sharing?
Number one, education is really local, so please understand that. I would say if you look at some of the Scandinavian countries, they've done a really good job, but they do tend to be more homogenous, both in language and in culture, but they've done a fairly good job. I would actually point you to more kind of smaller ecosystems. You could look here in the United States at Full Sail University, which can teach you on your mobile device on your phone to go out and do things like maintain aircraft engines. I would look at specific technologies. There's one called Achieve 3000, which I was a part of, which I think has been very effective. That said, every model has to be very specific to its community. So email me, and if you told me what you were actually thinking about or the place or the where, I could be more specific in my answer.
Thank you. And as we wrap up, and you look to the future of global education development, what excites you the most, or what trends would you like to highlight as we close out?
You all excite me the most. I mean, looking at these faces, you are the future. And the fact that we have so many folks all around the world now who are connecting together around these conversations. Truly, that is the single most exciting thing. And by the way, the ability of technology to connect us closer and to connect us through language. We just need to make sure that we prioritize.
Thank you very much. I'll turn to Dr. Durbeck to close out.
Thank you very, very much for a really wonderful presentation. And I'm sure that although Susie did not have a chance to ask all the questions, you gave wonderful presentations and answers to all of them. One of the reasons that WIT has been doing basically an internship program at the United Nations for students since 1992 is exactly what you said. UN is critical for development, but in order to be able to understand how the UN functions, you need to have access to what they are saying, and that is why we have done that since 1992. So putting together the super loop speed technology, which you're talking about, and how imperative it is to increase the development and assist countries that are either culturally or otherwise handicapped in getting any technology, and providing information and availability to very bright students to participate in the United Nations, which is required of every one of our interns, is just a mandatory program that really needs to be accelerated in order to achieve goals that you have and I have and Susie has also. So thank you again very, very much. And your webinar will be on very quickly. I will make sure that I edit it very expediently. Have a very good week and take good care of yourself. And Susie, thank you very much for moderating. Goodbye.